A fugitive hides in an abandoned mansion and finds a baby alone, but he was the son of a billionaire, and what happens next shocks everyone. Leave a comment giving my story a score from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important. Subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The rain hammered mercilessly against the asphalt of the bustling metropolis as the 28-year-old woman ran desperately through the deserted streets. Her bare feet bled against the frigid pavement, leaving red streaks that mingled with the grimy water in the gutters. Sirens echoed closer and closer, slicing through the early morning silence like sharp blades piercing her already shattered soul. Just 6 hours earlier, her life had completely crumbled. The white nurse's uniform she had worn with such pride for 5 years was now torn and soiled, transformed into a symbol of an accusation that had destroyed her in a matter of minutes. At the hospital where she had dedicated her life to saving others, she had been accused of stealing expensive medications, a lie as cruel as it was convincing, sealing her fate before everyone's eyes. The head nurse on duty, a bitter 50-year-old woman with eyes as cold as ice, had planted the evidence in her locker with the precision of someone who had been executing the plan for months. Vials of morphine and other controlled substances appeared exactly where she knew security would look, accompanied by falsified documents showing supposed sales on the black market. When the police arrived, there was no time for explanations or defenses. The cold handcuffs clamped onto her delicate wrists as her co-workers watched with a mixture of shock and disappointment that cut her heart more deeply than any physical blade. The humiliation burned in her chest like acid, corroding every fiber of dignity she had left. She managed to escape during the commotion in the hospital parking lot when a traffic accident distracted the officers for a few crucial seconds. She ran as she had never run before, driven by pure desperation and the certainty that her life as she knew it was over forever. There was nowhere to go. Her small, rented apartment was surely already under surveillance, and she had no close family in the city. The abandoned mansion loomed before her like a mirage in the desert of her misfortune, covered in overgrown vines and with broken windows that looked like empty eyes watching the night. The property exuded a ghostly air that normally would have frightened her. At that moment, it represented only shelter from the storm raging over her existence. She forced her way in through a side window, cutting her hands on the shards of glass still hanging from the deteriorated frame. The physical pain was almost a relief compared to the emotional torment consuming her. The interior of the house revealed signs of long-term abandonment. Furniture covered with dusty sheets, cobwebs decorating the corners like macabre lace. It was then that she heard the crying. The sound was low, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable to someone who had spent years caring for vulnerable patients. She followed the sound through the dark hallways, her heart pounding for entirely different reasons now. In what had once been a lavish library, she found the source of the crying that cut through the silence like a desperate plea. A baby, a few months old, lay in a makeshift crib, made of old blankets inside a cardboard box. The child was visibly hungry and cold, its small lips tinged blue from the low temperature. A delicate gold bracelet adorned its tiny wrist, with initials engraved that gleamed faintly in the moonlight streaming through the broken windows. Without hesitating for even a second, she picked up the baby, feeling the small, fragile body tremble against her chest. Her maternal instincts, dormant for years of solitary life, awakened with an overwhelming force. Nothing else mattered at that moment, not the escape, not the accusations, not the uncertain future. Just that helpless child who needed immediate care. She wrapped the baby in her own coat, offering the warmth of her body to warm the child's icy skin. The crying gradually turned into soft sighs as the little one calmed down in her protective arms. For the first time in hours, she felt something other than despair, a sense of purpose that transcended her own personal tragedy. For the next 3 weeks, She transformed that decaying mansion into a makeshift home for two lost souls. She got milk and diapers by begging discreetly at nearby grocery stores, always with her face covered by a scarf to avoid recognition. Her own clothes became extra blankets to keep the baby warm during the cold nights. The child flourished under her dedicated care, gaining weight and developing an angelic smile that illuminated even the darkest moments of her clandestine existence. She sang lullabies in a low voice, told invented stories about brave princes and kind princesses, creating a fantasy world where love always conquered evil. But reality has a cruel way of imposing itself on the sweetest dreams. One grey morning, while rummaging through nearby dumpsters in search of newspapers that could serve as kindling, her eyes fell on a headline that froze the blood in her veins. The photo of the baby she cared for with such love was plastered on the front page, accompanied by her own police mugshot and an astronomical reward for information. The text described the mysterious disappearance of the sole heir to one of the city's most powerful businessmen, a man whose fortune in stocks and diverse investments placed him among the most influential in the country. Her hands trembled as she held the crumpled paper, the truth revealing itself like a dagger piercing her last hopes. The baby she had saved and loved as her own belonged to a world completely opposite to hers. Worse still, she was now the prime suspect in a crime she had never committed, but that everyone believed had been her motivation from the start. The newspaper slipped from her trembling hands, falling onto the muddy ground like a sentence of condemnation. The baby in her arms continued to smile innocently, oblivious to the storm brewing around its little existence. She squeezed it against her chest, feeling the tears burn her cheeks as the cruel reality settled into her fragmented mind. For 3 weeks, she had created a bubble of protection and love around that child, imagining that perhaps it was a sign of destiny, a second chance to rebuild her shattered life. Now she discovered that every stolen moment of happiness only plunged her deeper into an abyss of accusations from which she would never be able to escape. The businessman mentioned in the newspaper possessed an estimated fortune in the billions, built through smart investments in stocks and diversification of his assets in multiple sectors. His lawyers were the best money could buy, and his political influence extended to all levels of local government. Against a man like that, she was nothing more than a grain of sand trying to withstand a hurricane. She ran back to the mansion, her heart beating so hard she felt the pulsations echoing in her ears. Every shadow seemed to hide a police officer. Every distant noise sounded like approaching sirens. The baby began to cry, feeling her agitation through the invisible connection that forms between caregiver and cared for. Inside the house, she paced back and forth for hours, waging an internal battle that tore her soul in half. Returning the child meant immediate arrest and probably decades behind bars. Keeping the baby meant turning him into a hostage of her own misfortune, depriving him of the father who surely loved him and was desperately looking for him. The hardest decision of her life took shape slowly, like a wound that heals, painful, but necessary. She couldn't be selfish with the future of that innocent child. The baby deserved to grow up in safety, with resources, education, and opportunities that she could never offer as a fugitive without prospects. She spent the night writing a detailed letter, explaining every circumstance that had led her there. She described how she had found the baby abandoned, hungry and cold, how she had cared for him for weeks, how she had discovered his true identity. She knew that no one would believe her version, but she needed to try to record her truth, even if it was ignored by the courts. In the early hours of the following morning, she prepared a basket with the baby's few belongings. A clean blanket she had managed to beg for, some improvised toys she had created with materials found in the house, and the letter folded carefully inside a plastic bag to protect it from the rain that was starting to fall again. The businessman's mansion was on the other side of town, in a neighborhood where the houses looked like fortresses, protected by high walls and sophisticated security systems. She knew the address through the newspapers she had obsessively followed over the past few weeks, trying to better understand the world to which that child belonged. The journey took almost 2 hours, walking in the shadows and avoiding the main streets where surveillance cameras could capture her image. She carried the baby against her chest, murmuring words of comfort that were perhaps more for herself than for him. Each step brought her closer to the end of that connection that had become the only good thing in her ruined life. The millionaire's property was even more imposing in person than in the newspaper photos. Meticulously manicured gardens surrounded a classically designed mansion, with marble columns and illuminated windows that suggested a life of comfort and stability. Everything she couldn't offer, but that child deserved to have. She hid behind a centuries-old tree on the neighboring property, watching the movements of the house through the ornate gate. Security guards patrolled the perimeter at regular intervals, and discreet cameras watched every angle of the property. Entry would be impossible, but returning the baby didn't require invasion, just courage to take the final step. She waited until one of the patrols passed, then quickly approached the main gate. She placed the basket on the ground, settling the baby as carefully as possible. The child watched her with those big, trusting eyes, not understanding that it was being handed back to the world that had lost it. She kissed his small forehead one last time, feeling her heart shatter into millions of fragments. She whispered a silent prayer that the baby would be happy, that he would grow up strong and kind, that he would never know the dark circumstances surrounding the first months of his life. She pressed the doorbell and ran to hide again, positioning herself where she could observe without being seen. She needed to be sure that the child would be found quickly, that he wouldn't be exposed to the cold night for longer than necessary. The door opened a few minutes later, revealing a tall man of approximately 30 years old, with tousled dark hair and eyes that carried the weight of weeks of despair. Even from a distance, she could see how he trembled as he spotted the basket, how his knees almost buckled when he recognized the baby he had been searching for tirelessly. The man shouted something inside the house, and soon several people emerged, employees, security guards, an older woman who seemed to be a housekeeper. Everyone crowded around the found child, voices mingled in exclamations of relief and disbelief. She watched as the father picked up his son in his arms, as tears streamed down his face as he checked if the baby was injured or sick. The pure emotion in that moment of reunion validated her decision, even if it cost her her own freedom. That child was where he should be, in the arms of someone who loved him and had the resources to protect him. She walked away silently, knowing that her presence there would become dangerous in a few minutes. The police would certainly be called, investigators would search the area, and tracker dogs would follow her trail. She had perhaps an hour before the hunt would resume with renewed intensity. She walked the empty streets with no set direction, feeling an immense emptiness in her chest where the purpose of caring for that child had once pulsed. Now she was once again just a homeless fugitive with no future, no hope. But at least she had done the right thing, and that small moral victory would be the only solace in the dark days that surely awaited her. What she didn't know was that the businessman, still holding his recovered son, was already examining the letter she had left in the basket. His eyebrows furrowed as he read the carefully written words, an expression of surprise gradually replacing the relief on his face. For the first time since the baby's disappearance, a doubt began to germinate in his mind about the true identity of the woman that everyone considered a kidnapper. The businessman stayed awake until dawn, rereading the letter dozens of times, while watching his son sleep peacefully in the crib next to his bed. Each handwritten word revealed details that only someone who had really cared for the child could know. The songs that calmed him, the specific way he liked to be held, even the small birthmark behind his left ear that few had noticed. The precise description of the medical care also intrigued him deeply. The woman mentioned checking for signs of dehydration, adjusting the child's body temperature, and even identifying a slight skin irritation that she had treated with limited resources. These were observations from someone with knowledge of healthcare, not a criminal desperate for money. 3 days after the reunion, against all the advice of his lawyers and security team, he made a decision that surprised everyone. He discreetly hired an independent private investigator, a man known for his integrity and for only accepting cases where he sought the truth, regardless of how much his clients were willing to pay to hear convenient lies. The investigator, a 50-year-old ex-cop with decades of experience, began by re-examining all aspects of the case from the start. He reviewed the hospital's security footage, re-interviewed staff, and analyzed the evidence that had led to the original accusations against the nurse. What he discovered left him deeply disturbed. The evidence against her was too convenient, arranged almost theatrically. The medications planted in her locker still had intact seals, something impossible if they were actually being sold on the black market. The falsified documents contained subtle inconsistencies in the handwriting and minor procedural errors that suggested amateur work. Even more revealing was the discovery that the head nurse on duty, that bitter woman who had made the accusations, had recently paid off several personal debts and bought a new condo, all paid for in cash. Her bank account showed irregular deposits that suspiciously coincided with the alleged thefts attributed to the innocent nurse. Meanwhile, she lived like a ghost on the city streets, sleeping in abandoned buildings and eating scraps found in restaurant dumpsters. The emptiness left by the baby's absence consumed her more than physical hunger. Her days were marked by deep melancholy, constantly remembering the child's angelic smile and questioning whether she had made the right decision. One night, while sheltering from the rain under an awning, she was approached by an elderly woman selling flowers nearby. The vendor, with kind eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances, offered her a sandwich and a hot coffee without asking questions. During the conversation that followed, the elderly woman mentioned having seen her picture in the newspapers and shared an observation that left her stunned. The vendor reported having witnessed, weeks before the baby's disappearance, a heated argument between 2 men near the abandoned mansion where she had found the child. One of them seemed nervous and agitated, carrying something wrapped in his arms, while the other gestured threateningly. The physical description that the elderly woman provided of the nervous man matched perfectly someone she recognized from the society pages of the newspapers. It was the businessman's younger brother, a 25-year-old known for scandals involving gambling and debt. The pieces of a sinister puzzle began to fall into place in her mind, revealing a possibility that she had never considered. The baby had not been abandoned by chance. He had been deliberately placed in that house by someone from the family itself. Around the same time, the private investigator was reaching similar conclusions through a completely different route. Tracing the financial movements of the businessman's younger brother, he discovered a complex web of debts with dangerous loan sharks and bets that had grown exponentially in the months leading up to the child's disappearance. Phone records revealed frequent calls between the troubled young man and known criminals specializing in kidnapping for ransom. Even more disturbing, security footage from a casino showed the young man drunkenly bragging about having easy access to his nephew, specifically mentioning how he could solve his financial problems once and for all. The investigation revealed that the original plan involved keeping the baby hidden for only a few days, enough time to extract a substantial sum from his businessman brother. However, when the magnitude of what he had done became clear, the young man panicked and abandoned the child in the decaying mansion, fleeing to another state in the hope that the problem would simply disappear. The businessman received these revelations with a mixture of anger and devastation that left him physically ill. Discovering that his own family had put his son in danger while an innocent woman was being persecuted unfairly completely reversed his understanding of events. The gratitude he felt for the woman who had saved his baby intensified until it became an obsession to find her and repair the injustice committed. Using all the resources of his considerable fortune, he mobilized a discreet operation to locate her before the official police could arrest her. His men scoured every alley, every makeshift shelter, every place where a desperate person could hide. The search lasted 2 agonizing weeks, during which he could barely concentrate on his business. The encounter happened on a rainy early morning when she was discovered sleeping in an abandoned underground parking garage. She was visibly thinner and weaker, her previously bright eyes now clouded by exhaustion and despair. When the businessman's men approached, she didn't try to run. She simply closed her eyes and waited for the inevitable. The surprise on her face when she was gently helped to her feet and led to a luxurious vehicle instead of being handcuffed was indescribable. During the silent journey to the mansion, she remained tense and confused, unable to understand why she was being treated with dignity instead of brutality. In the mansion's library, the same place where the businessman had spent sleepless nights reading her letter, she was finally confronted with the whole truth. He presented all the evidence collected by the investigator, explained how he had discovered his brother's betrayal, and detailed how he had proven her innocence in both the baby's disappearance and the theft of medications from the hospital. She listened to everything in stunned silence, tears streaming down her cheeks as years of nightmare began to dissipate before irrefutable proof of her innocence. When he finished speaking, he handed her a folder containing documents that would restore her legal identity, her professional reputation, and her freedom. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. As she leafed through the documents with trembling hands, he casually mentioned having recently acquired the hospital where she had worked, a purchase initially motivated by the need to honor the memory of his late wife, who had lost her life in that same institution during childbirth complications. The coincidence was so extraordinary that both fell silent for long minutes, processing the implications of how their destinies had intertwined long before they had met personally. She had worked at the hospital that now belonged to him, cared for the son he had temporarily lost, and suffered injustices perpetrated by employees who were now under his authority. The air between them became charged with an inexplicable tension, a magnetic attraction that transcended gratitude or coincidence. He watched her with an intensity that made her blush, while she fought against feelings that she considered inappropriate given the disparity between their social positions. The chemistry was undeniable, but also terrifying for completely different reasons. The following months unfolded like a delicate dance between two people fighting against an attraction forbidden by their own consciences. She returned to the hospital, now under new, fairer management, but she carried emotional scars that didn't heal easily. The distrust she had developed during weeks as a fugitive made her constantly question his true motivations, fearing that his gratitude was being mistaken for something deeper. He, in turn, found himself divided between the role of responsible employer and the growing feelings that he couldn't control. He visited the hospital with unnecessary frequency, always finding excuses to check on administrative improvements that coincidentally led him to the sector where she worked. He watched her care for patients with the same maternal dedication she had shown with his son, feeling his chest tighten with a mixture of admiration and longing. The first crisis arose when an investigative report threatened to publicly expose their relationship. An ambitious journalist had discovered connections between the ex-fugitive and the millionaire businessman, building a sensationalist narrative that painted her as a calculating opportunist. The article suggested that the whole situation had been orchestrated so that she could get close to a man whose fortune in investments and stocks was worth more than small towns. The threat of exposure forced both to face feelings that they had been denying for months. During a heated confrontation in his office, she accused him of using his position of power to toy with her emotions, while he countered by questioning why she always assumed the worst intentions in his actions. The discussion culminated in a moment of mutual vulnerability, when he confessed that he couldn't stop thinking about her since the day he read her letter. The physical proximity during that discussion almost resulted in something irreversible, but she pulled away at the last second, reminding him of the social differences that separated them. She left his office with tears in her eyes, leaving him alone with the certainty that he had crossed a line he shouldn't have crossed. In the following days, she avoided any unnecessary contact, restricting herself to her professional duties. The situation became even more complicated when his brother unexpectedly returned to the city, bringing with him a new burden of problems. The young man had accumulated even greater debts during his absence and now faced direct threats from violent creditors. In an act of desperation, he sought her out at the hospital, begging for forgiveness and asking for help to convince his brother to save him once again. The encounter deeply disturbed her, who found herself face to face with the man responsible for months of indescribable suffering. Her first reaction was pure anger, but it gradually gave way to a complex understanding of addiction and self-destruction. When she told the businessman about his brother's visit, she saw in him a pain that transcended any financial conflict. It was the grief of someone who loses a loved one to destructive choices. It was she who comforted him that night, offering a strong shoulder when he finally collapsed under the weight of years of trying to save someone who didn't want to be saved. The emotional intimacy of that moment broke down the last barriers between them, revealing that what they felt went far beyond gratitude or physical attraction. It was a mutual recognition of souls who had found their counterpart through the most improbable circumstances. During the winter months, a comforting routine established itself between them. She often took care of the baby when business responsibilities kept him working late, creating a family dynamic that both feared to name. The child had become the link that allowed them to be close without admitting their true emotional needs. The afternoons they spent together were charged with unresolved sexual tension. Innocent conversations about the baby's development turned into extended glances. Accidental moments of physical proximity when their hands touched when picking up the same toy, when she adjusted his tie before an important meeting, left both trembling with contained desire. The second major twist came through a disturbing discovery at the hospital. During a routine audit of old medical records, she found records that showed how the corrupt head nurse had systematically diverted medications for years, using the names of various innocent employees as scapegoats. Her own downfall had been just the latest in a series of injustices perpetrated by the woman. The revelation motivated her to seek out other victims of the head nurse, discovering a network of suffering that stretched for decades. 2 nurses had lost their professional licenses, a technician had been unjustly imprisoned, and several others carried permanent stains on their reputations. With the discreet support of the businessman, she organized a campaign to fully expose the scheme and restore the dignity of all those harmed. Working together on this cause brought them even closer, revealing shared values about justice and the protection of the vulnerable. He admired her determination to help others even when she was still dealing with her own scars, while she discovered a compassionate side of him that contrasted with his public image as a ruthless businessman. The final crisis arose when a group of investors publicly questioned his competence to lead the company, using his involvement with an ex-fugitive as evidence of compromised judgment. The attack targeted not only his business, but also her reputation, suggesting that she remained a criminal who had seduced a powerful man to escape justice. The smear campaign threatened to destroy everything they had built: her professional rehabilitation, the emotional stability they had found together, even the safety of the baby they both loved. During a particularly dark night, when it seemed that the forces against them were insurmountable, she made a painful decision to step away completely to protect him from further harm. She left a goodbye letter explaining her decision, highlighting that her love for him and the child was exactly why she needed to leave. She could not continue to be the source of scandals that harmed his professional life or threatened the baby's future. She prepared to leave the city again, this time out of love rather than fear. He found the letter the next morning and felt as if the world was crumbling around him for the second time. But this time, instead of passively accepting the loss, he decided to fight. He called a press conference where he publicly exposed the whole truth about his brother, about the injustice suffered by her, about how she had saved his son, risking her own freedom. His passionate statement before the cameras removed any doubt about the nature of his feelings. He admitted to loving a woman whose character surpassed that of anyone he had ever known, regardless of her social origin or the prejudices of a hypocritical society. He declared that any investor unable to recognize her integrity did not deserve to be part of his companies. The public response was overwhelmingly positive, with thousands of people sharing similar stories of injustices and prejudices overcome by true love. His courage in facing social conventions inspired others to reassess their own biases about relationships between different classes. She watched the press conference from a bus terminal, ready to board a bus that would take her away. His words pierced the defenses she had built around her heart, revealing that running away again would be the real cowardice. Their love was strong enough to face any social storm. The reunion happened at the mansion where it had all begun, with her arriving at the exact moment he was putting the baby to sleep. They didn't need words. The relief and passion in their eyes communicated everything their hearts had kept silent for so long. The first kiss was an explosion of suppressed feelings, sealing a commitment that transcended any external obstacle. They married 6 months later, in an intimate ceremony, with the baby she had saved serving as ring-bearer in a symbolic representation of how fate had used tragedy to unite two souls destined to complete each other. Their story became legendary in the city, proof that true love can blossom in the most improbable circumstances and overcome any social prejudice when fueled by genuine courage and determination.